Just a second. The meeting is live.
Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Exam School Admissions Task Force. Because this is a remote session, I will ask Ms. Parvex to call the roll. If you would, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Contempasis. Mr. Acevedo? Ms. Aguirre?
Present.
Mr. Chernow? Mr. Kreger? Dr. Freeman Wisdom?
Present.
Ms. Grassa?
Present.
Ms. Lam?
Present.
Ms. Nagasawa?
Present.
Dr. Tang?
Present.
Ms. Wade? Ms. Sullivan?
Present.
And Mr. Contempasis.
Present. Thank you, Ms. Parvex. We are pleased to be offering live simultaneous interpretation in Spanish, Haitian Creole, Cape Verdean, Portuguese, Cantonese, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Somali, Arabic, and American Sign Language. After I finish introducing the interpreters, we will activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. Click the icon to select your language preference. Our Spanish interpreter is Randolph Dominguez. Mr. Dominguez, will you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, good evening, Mr. Contempasis and rest of the audience. Muy buenas tardes a todo el mundo. Mi nombre es Randolph Domínguez. Voy a ser su intérprete simultáneo el día de hoy. Para activar la interpretación simultánea deben de buscar en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Ahí van a buscar un icono que parece un globo terráqueo. Van a pulsar allí y van a seleccionar el idioma español. Si están utilizando un celular, en la pantalla, en la parte superior derecha, pulsen allí y busquen el idioma español para escuchar esta presentación en español. Gracias.
Thank you. Our Cape Verdean interpreter is Josanne Lopes.
Good evening, everyone. Boa tarde, meu nome é Josiane, se bem ser meus intérpretes simultâneos para que reunião ali. Para ter acesso à interpretação, clica no ícone de globo na parte inferior de seu ecrã. Se você tem telemóvel, clica no 3 pontinhos na parte superior de seu ecrã e seleciona Cabo Verdeano. Obrigada. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Portuguese interpreter is Christiane Lettner. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening. Oi, boa noite. Meu nome é Cristiane, eu sou intérprete de português brasileiro. Se você precisa ouvir essa reunião em português, na parte inferior da tela tem um globo, você pode clicar lá e escolher português para me ouvir no canal. Se você estiver no celular, na parte superior direita, 3 pontinhos, você pode escolher também lá o canal português. Obrigada.
Thank you. Our Vietnamese interpreter is Duyen Tru. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Duyên. I'm Vietnamese interpreter for the meeting tonight. Xin chào quý vị. Tôi là người thông dịch người Việt. Nếu mà anh chị có cần thông dịch tiếng Việt, hãy bấm vào quả cầu và chọn ngôn ngữ tiếng Việt. Tôi sẽ cung cấp thông dịch liên tục cho các anh chị ạ. Thank you.
Thank you. Our Cantonese interpreter is Anna Tse.
Thank you, Mr. Contempasis. 大家好，星期五下午好，我係 Anna， 我係你今日廣東話嘅同步翻譯員。咁你一陣間見到個地球儀嘅時候，請你哋撳落去揀 Chinese， 咁就會成功進入個廣東話嘅翻譯頻道。如果你用手機嘅話咧，麻煩你咧要撳嗰3個點撳落去嘅時候咧，就會有更多，亦都會成功進入個廣東話嘅翻譯頻道噶啦。一陣間見，多謝 ，Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our Mandarin interpreter is Terry Yin. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. 大家好，我的名字叫 Terry， 我会是你们的普通话翻译。待会儿呢，你们在这个屏幕下方就可以看到一个地球仪的图标，你点一下地球仪的图标，然后就选择 Mandarin， 就可以进入到这个普通话的翻译。如果你是用手机或者是用平板电脑上来的话呢，你就可以选择3个点，再选择这个翻译，也可以进入到这个普通话的翻译。好，谢谢，待会见 ，Thank you.
Thank you. Our Haitian Creole interpreter is Sergio Saint-Hilaire. Good
Hi,
evening.
everyone. Good evening. My name is Sergio Saint-Hilaire, Haitian Creole interpreter. C'est un plaisir encore pour nous avoir aujourd'hui pour nous interpréter pour. C'est moi-même, Sergio, qui a fait travail ça aujourd'hui et que nous demandons pour prêter attention à tout ça qu'on a fait et que nous très contents pour nous avoir aujourd'hui. Pour entrer dans la conversation, ou à cliquer en bas, petit écran là, ou à cliquer globe là, ou à commenter, ou à poser des questions, ou à participer, ou à faire tout ça qu'on a pour faire. Pas hésiter, tout ça pour dire, n'a dit pour. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Our Arabic interpreter is Ahmed Al-Rubai.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everyone. My name is Ahmed Al-Rubai. I'm your Arabic interpreter today. مرحبا. أنا اسمي أحمد الربيعي. أنا مترجم اللغة العربية لهذا اليوم. بإمكانكم الاستماع إلى الترجمة الفورية باللغة العربية بالذهاب إلى أسفل الشاشة. ستشاهدون علامة الكرة الأرضية. اضغط على علامة الكرة الأرضية ستخرج لك الاختيارات بالنسبة إلى اللغات. قم باختيار اللغة العربية وبعدها ستتمكن من الاستماع إلى الترجمة. شكرا جزيلا. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Our Somali interpreter is Camilla Fartoun Jamal. Please introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? My name is Camilla Fartoun. I'm going to be your interpreter for Somali today. Magacayga waa Fartoun Camilla. Galab wanaagsan qof walbo groupka meeshan ku jiro. Waxaan ahay galabta waxaan ahay tafsirina. Marka waxaad iga helisan globalka Soomaaliga. Halkaasaan isku aragno wixii u baahan tihiin ama su'aal qabtaan meesha ugu soo qori kartaan. Thank you.
Thank you. And our American Sign Language interpreters this evening are Erin Foley and Celia Michel. Thank you all for assisting us this evening. We will now activate the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. And I would like to remind everyone to please speak at a slower pace to assist our interpreters. We'll move on now to the approval of the minutes from the May 1st, 2021 student listening session. I believe everyone has had an opportunity to review those. At this time, I would like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes as presented.
I so move.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I second.
Thank you, ma'am. Are there any additions, corrections, deletions? Hearing none. All in favor of accepting the minutes of the May 1st student listening session, please signify by raising your hand.
I think do we not need to call roll tonight?
We will.
Mr. Kunter, okay.
As soon as I finish the acceptance of the minutes. Ms. Parva, all those opposed?
So point of order, Mr. Contemposis, to Mr. Acevedo's point, I do believe we need to call the roll to take this vote.
Thank you. Ms. Parvek, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, absolutely. Mr. Acevedo?
Aye. Thank
Ms.
you.
Aguirre?
Yes.
Mr. Chernow? Mr. Kreger? Dr. Freeman Wisdom?
Yes.
Ms. Grassa?
Aye.
Ms. Lam?
Aye.
Ms. Nagasawa?
Aye.
Ms. Garrett?
Aye.
Dr. Tang?
Aye.
Ms. Waite?
Aye.
Ms. Sullivan?
Abstain.
And Mr. Contempasis?
Yes. The
Thank
ayes
you.
have it. We will now move on, if we can, to the agenda. The review of the Boston Public Schools exam school admission results for school year 2021-2022. I believe we have a presentation this evening from Ms. Roberts and Ms. Hogan. Ms. Roberts, are you beginning?
I am here, yes, I am, thank you. And Ms. Hogan is going to help me with the PowerPoint. So ask her to look it up for me. So thank you all. Good to be with you again. And tonight we'll talk a little bit about the outcomes of the admissions and invitation process. Just want to remind everyone that what we've done so far is just send the invitations. What tonight won't cover is who actually accepts. So that will be, I'm going to slow down, a longer process. Can you go to the next slide, Ms. Hogan? So I'm going to just start talking about the applicant pool. The first, the middle column looks at the applicant pool for last school year, which would, those are the students who would have been applying to attend this school year. You'll note that there were a total of 2,833 seventh grade applicants last year. And for grade 9, there was 1,177. And you can see the breakout by BPS versus non-BPS. For this school year, there were a total of 1,666 grade 7 applicants and 760 grade 9 applicants. As we think about the decline in the applicant pool.
Excuse me, Ms. Roberts.
Yes.
Is this the right, are you reading from this screen?
I think, Ms. Sullivan, the totals that Ms. Roberts just read are numbers added together that are on this screen. So apologies, she's adding together the BPS and non-BPS grade 7 and the BPS and non-BPS grade 9.
Okay, helpful.
Get clear on the table. Apologies about that.
Thank you.
And thank you for clarifying the question because I was not quite clear. So just a note about that in terms of the decrease in the number of applicants. The exam schools last year was open to anyone that wished to take the entrance exam. So anyone who took the exam would have been considered an applicant. So they would be in those numbers for last school year. Obviously this year that was different. The second piece is that BPS students there was a significant increase also because of school-based testing in the fall of 2019. I also want to note that in prior years, BPS had a default school choice ranking for students that took the exam but did not rank it. But as this body knows, as part of the deliberation process, the one thing we did ask for BPS families to do, they were identified as eligible, but we did ask them to rank in order to be considered. So any BPS family whose child would have been eligible but did not rank schools, we did not rank the schools for those students as we had in past years. We go to the next slide, Ms. Hogan. So in terms of the number of invitations, of the total number of seventh grade applicants, almost 59% received an invitation, so 974 for grade 7. And for grade 9, about almost 45% received an invitation, so 340 students. We sent fewer invitations this year because we expect the temporary admissions process to lead to a higher acceptance rate. So our target enrollment for the 3 exam schools did not change from last year to this year. However, we expect a higher percentage of students invited to accept their seats. As I just mentioned a few minutes ago, we previously would default rank on behalf of families. And because we default ranked, that didn't take into consideration whether a family actually wanted to attend. However, for this year, every family who was invited took all of the steps. So they would have ranked the schools, showing a lot more of personal participation investment versus some of what we did in the prior years. So we do expect that there will be a higher take-up rate than prior years. Next slide, please. Thank you. So moving to, as we think about the expansion of diversity, socioeconomic status, and students experiencing homelessness, I apologize if that might be a little bit small. The percentage of invitations sent to economically disadvantaged students increased from 33% to 48% overall. And then for students experiencing homelessness and students also in the care of DCF received more invitations, increasing from 29 invitations last year to 73 this year. Next slide, please. So we're gonna talk a little bit about the geographic distribution. In some zip codes, as the slide states, there was little to no change in terms of the number of invitations received this year. But what we did know is that the zip codes with the lowest median income, again, based on the number of households with children under the age of 18, received more invitations than last year. So in particular, we'll note that Dorchester, Roxbury, and Mattapan are among those. And you will see greater geographic distribution than in some of the prior years. We do not have here a year-by-year comparison, but you do see the 7th grade and 9th grade invitations by zip code. Next slide, please. So as we think about invitations by race, the percentage of Black and Latinx students receiving an invitation increased from last year to this year by 6 and 4 percentage points respectively. So these are total invites across all invitations. I'm gonna move to the next slide, please. Also looking at sending school type, students from BPS make up 75% of invitations for this year. So that is an increase from 65%. Thank you, Ms. Parvex. Up from 65% last year. Students from charter, private, parochial, and MECO students comprise 25% of invitations for this year. So a slight shift in that, and you can see the variation across the years. Next slide, please. So as we turn to look at English learners and students with disabilities, students who are English learners and students in special education programming also received more invitations than in previous years. Students who are English learners received 109 invitations, up from 41 last year. And students in special education programs received 66 invitations this year, up from 34 last year. And I believe that is our last slide, is it not, Ms. Hogan? So we're happy to answer any questions that we can. Also, if there are other requests for data, we're happy to take those back with us and hopefully bring answers to the next meeting.
I think Mr. Acevedo, you have your hand up. Please go forward.
Thank you, Mr. Contrepasis. Ms. Roberts, we often hear from our parents as they share their public comments about the impacts in their particular zip codes. Usually, most often, the decline in the numbers for the particular zip codes. And I know that this isn't a comparison of year to year between last year and the next. Is it possible to obtain a year-to-year comparison, at least over the last, say, couple of years versus this year, to draw those comparisons with respect to the zip codes and movement up or down with respect to the zip codes?
I believe we can provide that, just making a note so we have that for you.
Thank you, Monica.
Ms. Lum?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just requesting a reminder with regards to how we broke out the invitation process between the 20% merit and the 80% by zip code. The 20% merit, did the number of those seats impact the number of seats available and in the zip codes at all, or were they looked at separately, meaning 20% of the seats were allocated by merit according to school ranking, and then of the remaining seats, that's what got divided up by percentage? So if someone, so for example, if someone came out of merit from one zip code, it did not take a seat away from that zip code, correct?
That is correct. So we had first 20% of the seats, first by GPA across the city, and then the remainder of the seats would have been 80% of the seats across the schools would have been available for distribution by zip code, and again those were based on the percentage of families with school-age children under the age of 18 proportionally.
And as a follow-up, are we able to see the distribution of the 20% by zip code, just out of curiosity?
Okay.
Thank you.
Put that down. Mr. Contreras, I see hands. I don't know who had their hand up first. I see Ms. Aguirre.
Ms. Grassa. Ms. Grassa.
Thank you. I actually have a couple of questions. Are we able to see the makeup of the accepted students by school, the demographic makeup?
So you want to think about in terms of who was invited, what schools they're coming from?
That would be lovely too, but no, I was thinking more like each of the 3 exam schools, who was accepted into each school by demographic.
Okay.
And I think you said there was, I think I heard this, but was there a drop in students who participated in this process this year?
Yes, there were. Also just recalling that last year we did school-based testing, and so many students participated in the test. Anyone who participated in the test would have been considered an applicant. And if they were a BPS student, they did not have to rank because we auto-ranked for them if they did not rank.
Okay, and so I wonder, Monica, for that part, I wonder if we look at 2 years ago data, how many people applied? Because it does look very significantly different about how many people applied to exam schools. And I think there could be a lot of assumptions made about that. And so that's why I was just curious about that. And then my last question is, you stated that we offered less seats because we think more people will accept. And I'm just curious why we think more people are going to accept this year.
Yeah. So this year we required everyone to proactively either apply if they were a non-BPS student. If they were a BPS student, they were notified of their eligibility, and they still had to go through the process of ranking schools. In prior years, in particular, BPS students who did make up a significant portion of the applicant pool in prior years did not have to rank. We ranked for them. In this year's applicant pool, so we might have ranked for you, but you may not have actually intended to come to a school.
So we know, okay, so we factored in the percentage of people that we rank for who don't actually accept. Got it. That's the part of it that I missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Aguirre.
Yeah, I also think that, as Mr. Acevedo said, it will be really important to have a comparison with previous years of the number of seats by zip code, because I have also seen like many parents asking about that. I was also wondering if we could have, when can we have this presentation? Because it's a lot of numbers and I need more time to process all this information, and I would like to have it and spend some time on that. And one more thing, if we could have some demographics of the merit seats, who got the merit seats, but either by a school or by just simply by charter, private, BPS school, and how the other students were distributed, and the demographics of people who got invited to each exam school.
Ms. Skerritt?
Actually, I believe I'm next.
Sorry, I didn't see you.
Ms. Roberts, I just want clarification on, because I'm hearing the terminology, it's new to me, this term of merit seats. Could you please explain how are the 80% allocated?
Yes, so the 80% of the seats were allocated on a proportional basis. So each zip code would get a proportional number of seats available overall in 80% bucket. And I'm going to ask Ms. Hogan, she might have to help me with this, allocated. And so those students were ranked by GPA. I think to your point, it's the highest performing to the lowest performing ranked. And then those seats are given in that order. Versus the 20%, which looks at the city-wide ranking of GPAs, and then in the order of highest to lowest, those students were admitted.
So all of the seats are allocated based on merit. Just the first 20% are allocated citywide. The 80% are allocated based on neighborhood zip code.
Yeah.
But in each instance, the students with the highest GPA are offered seats. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so all of the seats are merit-based in terms of, well, to the extent that grades are an indicator of merit.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Could you also repeat, I forget which slide it is, the ELL demographics?
Ms. Hogan, do you want to share that? I think it's slide 8. I can talk about it. So there are students who are English learners and students in special education programs did receive more invitations than prior years. So our English learner invitations are up from 41 last year to 109 this year. And then for special education, last year there were 34 invitations and there were 66 invitations this school year.
Do you know what, or do you have, has analysis been done to assess how or what attributed to the increase in access for ELL students and students with disabilities?
Ms. Hogan, you want to take that one?
We haven't done deeper analysis, but that is certainly something that we can look into.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Skerritt?
No, Ms. Nagasawa, gotta read it from the other way.
Okay.
Ms. Nagasawa is next.
I can't distinguish.
I know the iPad. I'll let Ms. Nagasawa go and then I'll go. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm wondering if it's, so we know that within zip codes, there's still a large amount of socioeconomic diversity. And I'm wondering if it's all possible to break down within each zip code the amount of socioeconomically disadvantaged students who come from each zip code.
Like the percentage of economically disadvantaged students within each zip code, is that?
And the percentage that were invited to the exam schools.
Thanks. I was just following up on Ms. Grass's question about the number of invitations and there being lower this year, as I know we've gotten a lot of inquiries from families. And so I just wanted to add on that I don't know if it's not the planning and analysis, the data and enrollment. Ms. Hogan, which team is it that does that works on projections? The name of the office.
Planning and analysis.
Planning and analysis, excuse me. I just wanted to share, as we saw some of Ms. Roberts' data on school type and shifts in sending school types, for example, there are different historical acceptance rates by sending schools, et cetera. And so that team engages in a lot of historical analysis in terms of trying to predict yield, in addition to the engagement work that was done around having families already commit to ranking, which would suggest an increased likeliness to attend. So just wanted to add that on because I know there've been a lot of questions around the lower number, and it was carefully studied by planning and analysis, hence the lower invite numbers.
I see Ms. Tung's hand is up.
One of my questions is about the English learners whose invitations more than doubled. And do you know what, so English learners are grouped by English language development level. So can we have the disaggregation by ELD level at soon? I don't expect you to have it now.
Yeah.
And same with the special ed.
Yes,
if we could disaggregate by disability type. And for the English learners also by home language would be important. And then I'm not sure, the conversation's going by fast and I couldn't collect all the information with the few seconds of each slide, but has anybody asked for the disaggregation of invites by feeder school and race and socioeconomic status? Thank you.
Mr. Gary, you have another question? I see your hand is still up.
Yeah, sorry, I have another question. I was wondering if we could have more information about the ranking of the schools and like how many people rank first each school, and if possible, using some demographics.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I'm sure there will be some other. Oops, Ms. Tong, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I guess just for, so we've now thrown a lot of questions at the office of either ODA or planning or whatever. And so there's going to be a lot of analysis run. And I know it's another set of codes, but for all of these questions, it's good to know the answers for all 3 exam schools, but also for each one, because we have 3 very different exam schools.
So what you're asking, if I may, is that you want all of the disaggregated data by school as well?
Yes,
correct?
please. Yes.
Okay. Good enough. Anything else? Well, I know these were sent out quite late today, but I also want to thank both Ms. Roberts and Ms. Hogan for persistence. I know it took a great deal of effort to get everyone on the same wavelength in terms of putting all of this together. So I think everyone has received them. I realize it might have been difficult to follow along with all of them.
Mr.
And if there are,
Contemporace, sorry, folks are going to receive the slides from Ms. Parvex after the meeting, I believe.
okay, very good. And if there are additional questions, obviously, if you would forward them to either Ms. Roberts or Ms. Hogan, we will try to get as many of the questions responded to as soon as possible. Anything else that folks want to add to this particular segment of the agenda?
So Ms. Roberts and Ms. Hogan, what are you thinking in terms of time? How much time will it take for you to respond to, as Ms. Dr. Tung indicated, or just a number of requests for data?
I'm gonna ask Ms. Hogan to help estimate that, because some of the data crunching would probably be supported by her office.
I think we can, Ms. Roberts and I can confer, and I'm gonna optimistically say potentially the end of next week, but we can follow up with a more certain timeline, knowing that the urgency of this body in the recommendation that you need to make. So
I appreciate that. Actually, could you please let me know if this is going to take longer than next Friday, so that requests can be made for additional supports? I am concerned about any additional delay because I'm mindful of time. And so what I am very concerned about are any delays in receiving information and how that may prevent us from achieving the task at hand. So if supports are needed, again, please let me know as soon as possible, so that additional supports can be secured in order to get the information to the task force. Is that helpful?
Yes.
All right. No, thank you. Thank you both. Ms. Lum. Oh, Ms. Aguirre, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry to keep asking. I was wondering if we can also have some information of the percentage of students who were able to go to the school that was the first choice, and also to know if there was any difference by zip code, if students in one zip code were more often accepted in or able to go to the first choice than students in a different zip code.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Lum.
I just wanted to get a sense of when you think we'll know the results with regards to acceptances. And should we, and this may be a question for the task force writ large, but should we anticipate requesting similar data of the acceptance group in addition to the invitations?
That's a good question. I think what we can probably do is what I would call dipsticking at particular points and let you know what percentage of families have confirmed or declined seats. One of the challenges in a city like Boston, where we have so many options, families are often still figuring out when they're going to confirm their seat. And for Boston Public Schools, we generally give families up until the last day that we do what we call a did not report. So I think that's the 8th or the 10th day of school. I'm looking at my school leaders, I think it's the 8th day of school.
The 8th day.
Yeah, so after which families no longer have access to that seat. So I think we can give you some estimates around, at this point in time, how many have responded, how many we have heard from, but the full process would probably outlast the life of this body in terms of your goal is to make recommendations.
But Monica, isn't there like a date they have to accept by? And that means some people might accept and not show up, but we would at least know how many accepted.
So we don't actually have a hard acceptance date in Boston Public Schools. So, but let me do some digging on that as well, and then just come back to you from my team in terms of looking at historical patterns in terms of when people generally have, the majority of people have accepted invitations by.
Anyone else? My assumption is that as we see some of the additional data that's been requested, there will be additional questions that are raised. And, you know, hopefully, if you all think of something else that you think you would like to see, please forward that as I've indicated earlier. The next item on the agenda, if we're ready to move on, talks a little bit about possible criteria for admission. And the intent here, at least from my perspective, and I'll ask Ms. Sullivan to offer hers as well, was to get some response over or from not only the data you may have seen this evening, although I recognize it's brand new, but also on some of the things that we may have presented over the last month and a half from other districts that might be of some interest in pursuing. You've heard extensively from the vendor of the map test. There may be additional concerns. I know, Ms. Tung, I've seen your additional request. Have you heard anything back from the vendor yet? Ms. Parvek, have you?
No, I haven't, but I think Ms. Hogan had some more information. She said they were working on it.
Okay,
Yeah,
great,
I had a brief conversation and they're working on preparing responses.
good, good. So the floor is open in terms of, you've heard at least a brief summary of the results that have come in vis-a-vis the invitations. We've heard from other districts as to how they are proceeding. What, if anything, has struck you as something you would like to look at, in addition to possibly creating data runs that might be of value, given some of the information that has been received? So the floor is open.
Actually,
Ms. Sullivan, if you would.
process, yeah. Let me just plug in my earpiece here. So I actually, you know, I shared it a few moments ago and have shared it, I think probably every meeting up to this point, you know, that, you know, ultimately we have a charge to keep. And, you know, today really marks a transition point in our work where we have to start focusing on really trying to get to hopefully a recommendation as it relates to the admissions processes, the admissions policy. Ultimately, we will make a recommendation. The decision rests with the school committee. And so our charge really is to, you know, do our best to come up with a recommendation that really does meet the needs of certainly each of these schools, the students, the families, but our city as a whole. And so I really want to encourage us, even though it might be difficult, to lean into this portion, because up to this point, we've been listening for the most part. Now we've got to start engaging. So with that, I am looking forward to hearing what folks have to say.
Ms. Lum?
Again, this is more of a question to the task force. But how do we feel, especially those who were on the working group initially that made the first recommendation? Are we comfortable that the projections that were made to the working group are borne out in a way that tracks with our expectations in the reality of the invitations in terms of our hope for broader socioeconomic diversity and access? I asked the question to provide the task force with a benchmark from which to work from with regards to new recommendations.
I think once we've seen some of the disaggregated data by school, it will reinforce, I think, what you're asking the task force to consider. On the surface, if you look at the data that was presented this evening, it appears that there has been some movement in the concerns that were raised as we began to look at some of the factors that we discussed at the work group level. I think to start the discussion moving a little forward, I think the zip code issue, particularly as it pertains to the results that have been shown, and coupling that with the mean family income as we did, may have had some disadvantage, particularly with families that are within that mean income determined by the families at large that may not have anywhere near that mean income. And so whether the zip code is an ideal item to consider or reconsider in light of the fact that it may have, to a certain extent, disadvantaged families that are not at that median income, we may want to add that to our consideration. Mr. Acevedo?
I'm not sure if Ms. Lum has another question or is finished. I see her hand still raised.
Thank you. Ms. Lum?
I would just want to follow up on that on this thread of conversation or consideration to think about more nuanced data than tract level data, census level data, with regards to the socioeconomic diversity that we're striving to achieve as one of the refinements to the criteria we started as a working group.
Thank you. Mr. Acevedo?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Contemplosas. I did want to, I've also been thinking a lot about the very careful legal guardrails that attends precisely this level, this area of jurisprudence. And I was very encouraged, frankly, by Michael Keating's feedback on Tuesday, and I would love to see. I'm not sure if it was shared, and somehow I missed it, and it got buried in my inbox. But I think I think it's very important to share the appellate court's decision upholding the decision of the the trial level court. only because I definitely want to study that, not from the vein of a lawyer, but because I think we're getting some very important instructions as to what the sense of the federal court will be in order to any decision that we make would be within, you know, the guardrails and of, you know, the jurisprudence with respect to this. This is going to require some very careful threading of the needle. The working group did a fabulous job of that last summer. It took a lot of scrutiny. We thought a lot through this, and we also had a great exchange with BPS's legal department, and that paid off in a set of bulletproof and lawsuit-proof recommendations. This is even more ambitious. So anything that we've already accomplished, I'd love for the bench to instruct us, you know, on what we've learned from the last time we did this. Again, if that hasn't already been shared with us, I'd love to see, and I think it would be great for the task force also to get a copy of that decision.
I think that's more than a reasonable request. I know some of us have received it. Is it possible that we, this question's to the two Monicas. I know the district has it. Is it possible to get that out to everyone? Ms. Roberts, are you still there? Ms. Hogan?
I believe we can, and I will follow up with Ms. Parvex on how to get that sent out.
Great,
Mr. Comclass, this is Michael Keating. If this would be helpful for us to furnish to anyone who can circulate it to the task force, the copy of the Court of Appeals opinion would be very easy for us to do that. We have it available. Whatever it works out best from your point of view, we can get the Court of Appeals opinion to someone who can distribute it. You just let me know what's the best way to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Keating. Either Ms. Grassa or Ms. Skerritt, I don't know which one is first, so you both have a question.
Ms. Grassa's hand blends in with the wall at the Curly School.
Sorry, it matches my school colors.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I have been thinking about the zip code piece, and I also know we have the opportunity index in Boston Public Schools that we use to allocate partnerships. And my understanding of the opportunity index, and I could be wrong, is that like we take a zip code and we break it into smaller chunks based on some census data. And so I'm wondering if using the opportunity index, which is data we already pull and already use to equitably fund our schools, that might be a more equitable way to get the representation across the city within our exam schools. I would say we'd probably need some info from the Opportunity Gap Office, who certainly, and Monica Hogan, I'm sure knows much more about the Opportunity Index too, but just wondering if that would have an impact.
I'm happy to share a little now, or we can put an overview on a future meeting agenda.
Just
Mr. Comclass or Ms. Sullivan, if you have a preference.
I'm sorry to be corny.
I have no preference. If you're able to respond to Ms. Grassa's question now, that's great.
Yeah, give a really high level overview, and if we need more detail, we can prepare something. So essentially the opportunity index is calculated at the school level. So every BPS school receives an opportunity index score. They're on a scale from 0 to 1. And the opportunity index is based on sort of 3 levels of information about students. So the first level is neighborhood. It takes census tract data based on the student's address and uses different factors to pull into the model. Secondly, it uses some descriptive information about the student. So if they are economically disadvantaged, if they live in public housing, the number of times they've moved houses in the last 5 years. And I think I'm forgetting one. And then it also uses, for students in grades 6 and higher, past performance data. So the percentage of course failures they've had, the percentage of MCAS failures, attendance, and suspension. We worked with the Boston Area Research Initiative to develop a multi-level model that integrates all of this information together to calculate a score for each school that then, as Ms. Grassa mentioned, is used to distribute what we call the partnership fund. I believe it's around $5 million that is distributed to schools in that way. So super high level. I am happy to provide more detail if that is of interest. However, because it is very much student-based, it is a student-based calculation at the school level, it would not be something that we could calculate for non-BPS schools because we don't have that detailed information about where the students live that attend those schools. So something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Monica.
Okay, Ms. Garrett.
Going back to the question around potential criterion or ideas for eligibility or selection, and it piggybacks right from where Ms. Grassa's point left off. I'm also really interested in the socioeconomic diversity that is sometimes challenged, as Ms. Nagasawa mentioned, in terms of just the wide variance of socioeconomics in a single zip code, or some information that might be difficult to obtain from other agencies from year to year. So I was also thinking about schools as kind of proxy for representation of various resources or access to external supports that more advantaged families may have in terms of things like preparation and others. And so I really appreciate the opportunity index for the use of partnership funds as we use it in BPS. With the limitations that Ms. Hogan mentioned, I wondered if there was something that was more obtainable from something like DESE that's easy for families to understand, because I think as we think about a permanent model, there have been so many follow-up questions to an understandable one-year proposal that folks are just learning, but I think it should be something that people can easily get their head around. And I was thinking about just the percent of economically disadvantaged students in a school, potentially being able to offer some sort of points in addition to other indicators. I was really drawn to Detroit's presentation around their model that was built around a point system. The presenter talked about the importance of something that every student accesses. And for me, I would say that an assessment should be that thing that everyone accesses. But there's also so much importance in the grades that students earn. And then they had some differentiation with the ability of students to be able to earn extra points by school type. And I think that's something that allows us to look at schools more apples to apples across districts is really important, because we have students who do reside in the city with low economic backgrounds who don't just attend BPS. And so I think it's important for us to be able to have an indicator that we can also assess from something like a charter school or somewhere else where a student who could thrive in a seat would benefit. And so I'd love to think about school type as something that we could look at more deeply in a way that we don't have to get 25 Geo Codes from the city of Boston, because I think those get very confusing to families.
Ms. Tung?
I wanted to agree with Ms. Lom that for me to answer your question about, what we're thinking about criteria for admission, it's logical to understand fully what happened when we changed the criteria this past year. And so I'm not there yet. And then I also just reviewed the charge of this task force. And I guess the relevant phrases are expand the applicant pool, maintain rigor, and reflect Boston students' diversity. And since I wasn't on the working group, I'm just curious if you all grappled with what rigor means. Because I think, like many things that we talk about, it probably means different things to different people. And for me, rigor would mean that my daughter can think creatively, grapple with ambiguity, collaborate well with others. But for others, it could mean something totally different. So in order for us to move towards the charge of the task force, I think we should either put out what we mean by rigor or agree on a definition that we can work towards. So just wanted to put that out. How would we know if our new plan meets that part of our charge?
I think that might lead to an additional conversation amongst the task force members. We chose, as you probably know, that we wanted students to be included in the applicant pool that could demonstrate grade level performance. We may want to stick with that, or we may want to look at what, as you have suggested, the task force feels is a definition of rigor that we can come to consensus on. So I think we probably should discuss it. Mr. Acevedo, I believe you had your hand up.
Actually, it was in connection to to Ms. Grasso's question about the opportunity index, and I've heard, I know that we landed on zip codes, and I know that the opportunity index, and this is just from my work on the Opportunity and Achievement Gap Task Force. And either Monica here, Monica Hogan or Monica Roberts could become more, just to delve into this a little more. But the Opportunity Index uses something even more minute than zip codes, which others have mentioned here. The census tract data, Geo Codes. And I'm just would just be curious. I know that this summer, with some of our projections, we did, Monica Hogan did just, of her many incredible projections that she shared with us, some of that were very helpful. We may have done some comparison of the impact of using Geo Codes versus zip codes to capture more nuanced picture of what's actually happening in dynamic neighborhoods like Charlestown, for instance, and East Boston, and or Chinatown. So just I'm just wondering if that's something that we should at least consider, explore, or revisit.
Yeah, just to reference what Mr. Acevedo is remembering. We did look at some of the census tract data for the city of Boston, similar to how Chicago uses census tract data in their model. So all of that is based off of the American Community Survey, and I'm happy to look into that more if that's of interest. I know Geo Codes have been mentioned a few times, and I just want to note that they are much smaller. And actually students in the city of Boston reside in over 800 Geo Codes. And so if we're going to think about any sort of use of those, I would highly recommend some grouping of them in some way. Because 800 is a very large number. For reference, there are 30 zip codes plus the homeless zip code in the process this year. So.
Yeah, my recollection, Mr. Acevedo, thank you for bringing the Geo Codes into this space, because they have been discussed multiple times in our previous work. I think the reason why, or I recall the reason why we didn't get to Geo Codes the last go around was because of time and how many Geo Codes there are. This actually came up between our first presentation to the school committee and their ultimate and the final recommendation that they voted on. That said, I believed then, and I still believe now, that looking at the Geo Code is something that we should do, because it could allow us to get to the issue that has been raised repeatedly with respect to income inequality within a particular zip code. So I want to agree with you and also state that we should get that data and figure out how it could potentially be helpful in our deliberations.
And I believe the city is ready to assist Ms. Hogan if that would be helpful. But I also am intrigued by what you said about combining them in some way. So if there are some ideas that you've experienced or you can share with us, that might be something for a future discussion. 800 is quite a big number. There may be ways to consolidate some of that information into respective groups. I don't know. I'm just raising the issue.
And that's, Chicago uses census tracts, not Geo Codes, but there are many census tracts in Chicago. I don't know how many offhand, but they are grouped into 4 tiers. And they do that proportion. They make each tier relatively equal in size in terms of the school-age children in each of the tiers. So that's certainly something that we could explore.
Good. I think the city is prepared to give you information both on the Geo Codes as well as the census tract.
Yep.
So take advantage of the offer and have them help out to the extent that they can. Ms. Nagasawa? I'm sorry, Ms. Nagasawa.
I know that census tracts are a couple of blocks, I think. Am I correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Could you, for my knowledge, I guess, how big are Geo Codes?
My understanding is they are smaller than census tracts, and I can get the precise definition and guidance around how they're made and share that at next week's meeting, just so I don't speak incorrectly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Tung, Dr. Tung?
So just so I have all of the options in my head for increasing the applicant pool and diversity of all types. We're talking about zip code, which we have tried, and we will be getting more data on. Census tracts, Geo Codes, opportunity index, feeder school, some sort of point or weight system, and some combination of those options. Is that oversimplifying? Are there ones that I've missed? Just want to compare the conversation with what other places have done.
I think that
No, I think you, go ahead.
looking at my list, because I think that captures everything that I've heard today in the conversation. I just have a clarifying question for you, Dr. Tung. What I heard you say is that you were trying to get your arms around the options for expanding the pool. Is that what you said?
I was just using the language from our charge.
Okay.
And I'm not referring to what happened for this round, the pandemic year round. I'm talking about the charge, which I assume stems from the data that we've had up through school year 1920.
Okay. Super helpful. Thank you.
Any other questions or concerns? I think I have one, and that is we need to re-examine the use of an assessment as a way of identifying the readiness of the applicant pool. And we've had discussions with the MAP folk, and we need to add that to our series of discussions in the task force. So that's another criteria.
Thank you, Mr. Contemplasis. I was going to actually ask that question as well to Ms. Tung and Ms. Sullivan in terms of the list that you had. I didn't really hear, and if it's there, please do correct me, the recommendation that Ms. Garrett did make in terms of the Detroit model.
Maybe I missed, I thought that the recommendation was relative to the tiering. Did I hear that incorrectly?
I think it also includes, it does include an assessment. It does.
Okay, I did not hear an assessment mentioned, but I'll add that to Ms. Garrett's list.
Well, it will be mine as well. Thank
you. And my list I was parsing it to the aspects of I wasn't touching readiness or rigor. I was just thinking about alternatives to zip code in case when we get data back, the zip code factor in this past years did not yield what we were hoping it would. So I wasn't addressing the assessment at all.
No, understood. Ms. Aguirre, I believe, or Ms. Sullivan, do you have your hand up or am I mistaken?
Yeah,
I believe Ms. Aguirre does.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you. I have a question for Ms. Hogan. I mean, the 30 zip codes is a number that is manageable. The 800 Geo Codes obviously is not. Can she give us an estimate of what will be like a number in between that is something that's manageable?
Manageable in terms of like logistics for sending the invitations?
Yes. I mean, not right now, but I mean, you know,
yeah.
to see kind of which parameters can we
yeah.
use. I mean,
I think we can think through sort of what are the pros and cons for different options.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Garrett?
Thanks. Thinking about that question that Ms. Aguirre asked about manageability, I just wanted to also lift up, in addition to Detroit's use of an assessment as kind of the piece that everyone accesses. I think they said it balances out the grades, I think was their word. I was also just very interested in their point system that allowed students to be treated as individual applicants, but still were able to weight them differently based on aspects of their profile, whether it's the school that they attended, because the concern thinking about, we do live in a very small city. And so as we look at some of the preliminary data around zip codes, you are seeing zip codes that talk about, single digit students. And I think that the opportunity for students to be able to live in neighborhoods of various sizes, but still feel as if there's some access is important at the same time that there's the essential diversity of all types. And so I really was intrigued by the model where we could think about a point system as opposed to an allocation by anything geographic. So that was where my intrigue and something around sending schools came. So I just wanted to clarify that piece. I know that ideas have been mentioned, not on this meeting, but many people often say, well, why not just take the X top students from every school who applies? And I don't know if folks are as aware that there are 80 to 100 schools involved in exam school admissions in a given year. There are students who are living in another country at the time of admissions. There are students who are being homeschooled at the time of admissions. So something that simplistic becomes really difficult when some schools have 6 students in a class and some schools have 60 students in a class. And so I just think that it's, it's an idea that works well in a place like Texas when considering, the state school system and taking students from high schools. But it doesn't feel as translatable to me in our tiny city with that many schools in the mix. It feels as if there could be a lot of students left out because maybe only one person or one half of a student would qualify for all 3 schools combined based on the size of their school.
Thank you, Dr. Tung.
A separate question about what Ms. Garrett just said. How do applicants who do not live in Boston the year before, so 6th grade year, get into the exam schools? You said that there were people from international schools?
I meant 5th grade, Dr. Tung, my apologies. So you do have to live in the city of Boston by the year of your application, but you could have, for instance, moved there in the summer before you begin the year before you admit. And part of our traditional admission system involves that 5th grade, for example. And so you could, if you're considering the sending school from there, you could have real variance of out of state and other factors.
Thank you. I think the other issue that we may need to revisit is the concern that has been raised over the use of grades. And some of the conversation that has occurred, both in the listening sessions as well as amongst the work group members, considering whether the grades that we use, the process that we use this year, is adequate to determine the readiness of the applicant pool. So I'd put that back on the table.
I actually have I don't have a note on this, so I would just want to make sure that it's on the list for BPS for Ms. Hogan and Ms. Roberts. With respect to the geographic diversity, that was, we had significant conversation regarding geographic diversity as a working group because the data indicated that historically there was not geographic diversity in terms of access to these schools, and that in fact there were some neighborhoods that had were overwhelmingly represented, while other neighborhoods were not represented at all. And so I know that we have the data from this year. Sorry for the background noise here. I know that we have the data for this year, but I'm curious to understand what the data from a geographic standpoint looks like for the past 2 to 3 years. Where have the invitations been extended, and where do children who accepted the invitations, where do they reside? Or where did they reside?
Yep, I have
Thank
that
you.
on my follow-up list. So
Thank you.
Anything else? Ms. Garrett?
Combining Ms. Sullivan's and Mr. Kanampasis's last comment about kind of understanding both the historical as well as the implication of solely GPAs. I think that looking at the 20% citywide seats this year will also be very helpful to see if there are any patterns regarding grade types or potential areas where higher grades are more common. I don't think that there's an equal distribution of grade types across the city. And so if some of the projections that we had may be slightly different because we expected the 20% to potentially be more citywide than it was, I think that might be useful for families and others to know as we consider some of the challenges when we're moving to a sole GPA model.
Agreed. I agree with that. And I'm sorry, I also wanted to go back to the ELL data and the student with disabilities data. Could we also get historical data on that as well? It'd be good to understand the impact of the temporary solution on increasing the access for ELL students and also students with disabilities. Thank you.
Dr. Tung?
What does grade type mean?
Rosanna, Dr. Tung, I think you
didn't
mean
hear
like,
you.
I think you mean like letters and numbers, because some of us use number grading and some of us use letter grading, but our numbers aren't like 80%. It's like a 1, 2, 3, or 4.
So, so somehow the office that does admissions collects grades from every feeder school and then converts them to a common. Okay. Thank you.
Correct. Ms. Lum?
Have we ever considered a 2-stage process for qualifying and inviting students, almost like an early admission type of role in higher education? So for example, if we across the board, non-BPS, BPS, and you can then figure out a way to create an analogous homeschool method, but maybe the top 10% of all students in the right grades, whether they wanted to or were thinking about or not thinking about an exam school, could at least be sent a letter early on to say academically you would qualify for admission to the school. Is this something you would consider? And that might be a way to accommodate some of the rigor and preparation question.
Ms. Garrett?
I think to Ms. Lum's question, it requires a data dive to know if I think that our exam schools could be potentially filled if you're saying top based on GPA, until we have an understanding of how many perfect GPAs, so to speak, there are. there may not be room for anyone if you went across the city of Boston and offered, you know, that proportion. So I think that the term top students, I think we just have to remember that the only data indicator we would have for that would be a report card. And we can have a feeling about that, but it becomes a GPA conversation to say top students. And so I think that's why the data on Friday is going to be really helpful for us to further understand a year where GPA has been more of the criteria than it has been, although it always has been half.
Ms. Sullivan?
Ms. Hogan, is that an analysis that could be run? The Texas model of using a top X percent, whatever that X percent of extending invitations to students who are in the top X percent of any sending school, whether it's public or private or parochial, is something that obviously is done in some other parts of the country, but is also something that we discussed this past summer. To Ms. Garrett's question, is there an analysis that could be done about, again, I don't know what the X is, but if we were to Ms. Lum's question, if we were to have a process whereby the top X percent, if a student is in the top X percent of their class, regardless of what school they attend, they would receive kind of this invitation. Are you able to put together some modeling around that? Is that possible? Like what that would do in terms of like, how many seats would that take up?
Yeah, we can certainly look at that for BPS schools. I think to Ms. Garrett's point of the number of schools that students come from when they apply. There are some years where, you know, there may only be one applicant from that school, and then we don't get another applicant for a couple of years. So I think some of those where there aren't very many students applying, but we could certainly look at for our largest schools that we know sort of traditionally have a large number of applicants. We can look at if it was the top 10% from each school, how many kids would that be? I think is the question you're asking.
Well, I just want to put a finer point on it. And I don't know, Ms. Lum, if this was what you were thinking. So correct me if I'm wrong. What I'm thinking is not the top X percent of those who apply from a particular school. I'm talking about if a student, right, of the school. If my child submits an application and they're in the top X percent of their class, not based on how many other kids are applying.
Yep. Yeah, we'll certainly add it to the list and let you know what's the word, limitations there are to what data we're able to provide.
Thank you.
Dr. Tung, and then I'm going to wrap this up because we have to go to public comment.
I'm just trying to follow what Ms. Lum was suggesting around the two-stage process. So you just recapped the first stage. What would the second stage be?
Undetermined. It was more that if there were an early in higher education, early admission processes are typically merit-based, if I'm not mistaken. And I was wondering if we might have a early admissions stage for those students who are high performing, regardless of whether they would have applied or wouldn't have applied. If they are high performing in their school, regardless of school type, could we have enough early admission type of process where once those early admission seats are filled, then you have the regular enrollment seats as any, again, higher education system would have, where students would then go through another process. So it would require changing the timeline for which we would begin the process of inviting students to apply. And it would certainly be more work on the part of the district, I'm sure, in terms of mapping that out in implementation. But I'm just throwing it out there as an idea.
So is the idea that in stage 2, it would be like anybody who wants to apply can, and there would be a lottery for getting in, or?
I haven't thought that far ahead.
Okay. Lots of interesting suggestions here. Let's move on, if we may, to public section, public comment. Ms. Parvik, if you will move on this item on the agenda, please.
Yes, no problem. Thank you, co-chair. We have 5 speakers this evening, and each speaker will have 2 minutes per person. I will let you know when you have 20 seconds left. Please state your name, affiliation, and what neighborhood you are from before you begin. When I call your name, please raise your hand virtually in Zoom. And also, please make sure you're signed into Zoom with the same name you used to sign up for public comment. That will allow us to identify you when it's your turn to testify. Our first speaker today is Tatum Donovan, followed by Kathleen Chardaboin and Marie Mercurio. So please raise your hands. Tatum Donovan. Please unmute. Hello? Hello, can you hear me? Tatum Donovan.
They may be double muted.
They're unmuted. Maybe. Let's try with the next one, and then we will come back to you. Kathleen. Just a second. There.
Hi, good evening. This is Kathleen. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Hi, I'm Kathleen Chardaboin. I'm a parent of 2 BPS students. I live in Charlestown. I'm also an alumna of BLS, and I grew up in 02122. And that really sparked my interest in understanding the zip code allocation policy, because 02122 is a disadvantaged zip code. And 02122 is actually disadvantaged by the policy. And when I looked very closely at exactly what the zip code allocation policy and the interim plan were doing to zip codes, I realized pretty quickly that it had nothing to do with a neighborhood's income. It had everything to do with the percentage of school-age children in a zip code. That is how the seats are allocated to zip codes. And of course, income comes into play when you're selecting your seats, but you cannot select a seat that you have not been allocated. So I thought it was critical before the plan even went into effect for the stakeholders to understand this. I testified 4 times to the school committee, along with many other parents who saw this happening. And we were all ignored. Now it has happened. Now we do see these admissions rates in low-income zip codes, such as Chinatown, where 21%, the numbers were shared tonight very briefly, but I did take a screenshot and I plugged it into a spreadsheet, which I've been tracking, which tracks the number of applicants. And that is an absolutely critical piece of information for the task force to look at. They must look at the number of applicants. Please don't just show us that Chinatown represents 1% of invitations. the key point is Chinatown represented 2% of the applicant pool, and they only
20
got
seconds.
1% of invitations. So we really need to see the applicant numbers by zip code. And the second point about the data is when I added up the allocation by zip code, it totals, well, the total amount of exam school seats are 974. If I take the allocation across each zip code, that means the total merit seats are 159. 159 is only 16% of 974. Why weren't 20% of merit seats distributed? So I would implore rather that the task force ask these questions and understand the full impact to zip codes, particularly to low income zip codes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will try again with Tatum Donovan. Tatum Donovan, please unmute yourself. Hello. We can't hear you. Maybe you can sign out and come back in, join the meeting again. Thank you. Next speaker is Marie Mercurio. Marie?
Oh, yes. Hello.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. My name is Marie Mercurio, and my past testimony has focused on BPS's need to increase transparency, communication, and access to an objective entrance exam for all kids in this city, all kids. I speak today not because I have been personally affected by the invitations for this upcoming school year, but I speak for the kids and families who have been affected. Plans have been upended and kids are devastated. Hardworking A and A- kids within my universe of Jamaica Plain were not invited to the exam schools because of where they live. This is especially important for lower income kids who have fewer options. In Jamaica Plain, we have 30% deed restricted affordable housing, and some of it very low income, especially the 840 apartments at BHA's Mildred C. Haley and Jackson Square. There are another 800 plus deed restricted affordable housing units, either in the pipeline or under construction between Jackson and Eggleston Squares. Families and kids who live or will live in these units in this zip code may be left behind by the zip code plan. Before the data was released tonight, parents had pulled together and analyzed the numbers from received letters in almost all zip codes. Ms. Roberts just confirmed our informed analysis based on the limited data that we had. I thank the task force who has smartly already requested more numbers around rankings, demographics, past year percentages, etc. We look forward to all of that being made public. We also just learned that less invitations were given due to the assumption that most students would accept them. Through the uncertainty of this year's process, I fear that many invitations have been declined. And that being said, can a wait list please be reconsidered? Open seats in highly desirable schools seems to be the antithesis of what a public school district should do. In my heart, I know that the halls of the exam schools, especially Latin school, could be more diverse. And we learned by tonight's presentation that this has been achieved for the upcoming school year. But the way we got here has devastated hardworking kids and upended family plans. Lower income kids with good grades and high income zip codes will suffer the most. The exodus to charter and private schools and to the suburbs has already started. Morale for BPS has sunken even further. Does BPS really want to lose more students and families? And what will the effects be to the city overall in terms of demographics and property tax base? In closing, we need to keep an objective exam that is fair and just. We need to keep the exam schools based on merit only. BPS needs to step up and increase communication, transparency, and access to the exam for all kids in Boston. I know you are all committing a lot of time to this task force, so I really do thank you for that, and I thank you for listening. Good night.
Thank you very much. I will try again with Tatum Donovan.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I am Tatum Donovan and I live in South Boston. Can I start?
Yes, please start.
Okay. I live in South Boston and I'm a sixth grader at the Elliott K-8 Innovation School in the North End. I'd like to thank the task force for allowing me to speak this evening. Thank you for trying to make the exam school process more equitable. However, by using a strict zip code quota, the result was to exclude some of the brightest kids in the city. Although I am very lucky that I received an invitation to attend Boston Latin this fall, some of my brightest classmates were not offered invitations merely because of the zip code in which they live. As you may know, the Elliott draws students from many of Boston's zip codes, for example, from East Boston, with an exam school cutoff of 77 to the waterfront with a cutoff of 1. One of my classmates, who was ranked 183 citywide, did not receive an invitation to any of the city's 3 exam schools. That's the top 11% citywide. She would have thrived at BLS, but they live in the wrong zip code. On the other hand, another classmate received a seat at BLS, even though their parents ranked BLS 3rd and Elliott, their home school, 1st. That student will not be attending BLS as their parents know their child's better than BPS does and prefer the Elliott for their child's learning needs. But I guess they live in the right zip code. That's too bad that that seat can't go to one of the many deserving students in the city who actually wanted to attend. I know you guys are looking for ideas to improve the system, so here are some of mine. 1, BPS can use admission in an admission process similar to private schools, including grades, a standardized test, essays, interviews, and racial and socioeconomics. 2, consider using all grades, including science and specials, in calculating GPA averages and ranking. Maybe there would be less ties that way. 3, go back to the old ways and just use grades and an exam, but work to make all of BPS schools excel and succeed. Is there a task force dedicated to fixing BPS's underperforming K-8 schools? 4, why are we all fighting over 3 high schools? Work on fixing BPS's high schools to meet the needs of all of the city students. Thank you for letting me advocate for the students who are being affected by your important decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Stuart Wang. Please raise your hand, Stuart. Please unmute yourself. Stuart, please unmute yourself. So let's try with the next speaker and then we can come back. Rufeng Li. Rufeng Li.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Rufeng Li. I'm a parent of 3 BPS school children. We live in West Roxbury. Although the presentation may make sense number-wise, each family is not a code number and carries a story. So tonight I would like to share our family story here. I hope the takeaway is that the GPA being used this year was not so reliable, that the zip code combined derailed our family plan. Okay, here's our family story. As we see, we have 3 children in all the Boston public schools from kindergarten on, a 10th grade and a twin 6th graders. We had high hopes that our twin 6th grader would qualify for exam school this fall, and we also felt confident that they would. Why? They both were invited into AWC as a 4th and a 5th grader, and both were invited and enrolled last year in the citywide program for promising minority students. The program aimed to prepare them for the exam school test, the UEMF test. But in the last October, we learned of a policy change to drop the exam entirely and place a heavy weighting on all their 4th and 5th grade marks and zip code. Although we knew our twins are on the top of their respective classes, our twin boy unfortunately had 3s, which went to the final GPA calculation. Combined with our zip code, the sad end result for us that our very bright son who couldn't get into any exam school. as was the case for anyone else in that same 5th grade classroom. It's not just his, the whole class, because the teacher, the way to evaluate them. Fortunately, another my twin girls school, classroom have several got into, including my twin girl, who got an 11.75 GPA, but still ranked 112 out of 1666. And we heard about justification of AWC program becoming excellent for all because some family complained their kids who couldn't get into felt bad. How do you think of our family? We have a 10th grader in BLS, our incoming twin girl with BLS, and this boy is, if not better prepared for that, but I mean, that's a situation we got into. So we also felt that my son's classroom, everyone else had felt so bad for the little kids, and some families are leaving already. So I guess my hope for this is like, which for the future exam, school should have some part of exam, or at least or combine the not just the single point GPA or some kind of stuff. You should assess the kids the way should be more fairly, not based because of their teacher, not because their zip code. Just I mean, I just want you guys to hear this story. So we hope our boy would have a chance in 9th grade for the 9th grade entry exam, which I really hope is not only zip code based. You know, our situation, we cannot move, we are not rich, so we cannot maintain 2 houses. We want to stay in BLS, but we really want you give us a chance to let the boy to take an exam, to thrive, or to join with his siblings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last speaker is Stuart. I can't see the name anymore. Stuart, are you there? Stuart Wang? Yeah, I don't see, he's not there anymore. So Mr. Contempasis, Ms. Sullivan, that concludes our speaker for this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Parvik. Is there any additional concerns that we haven't discussed that someone has thought of that would like to take a few minutes to add to the discussion? Hearing none. Okay, I'm sorry, Ms. Nagasawa, go right ahead.
I have been thinking about one of our earliest conversations as a task force, I think. And I think in the first presentation we ever listened to, our presenter emphasized that though we can use like zip codes or census tracts or geo codes or school to approximate a student's socioeconomic status, there will always be flaws in that and there will always be exceptions. So I think I would be interested in at least considering a student's individual socioeconomic status, possibly. Well, yes, I haven't entirely thought it through, but I think I'm interested in continuing to think about that.
Good. Thank you. Dr. Tong?
I'm wondering if we think of other modeling or simulation runs that might be helpful for the task force. Can we submit those? Because I know that Monica Hogan now has a long list. Can we add to that list?
I think during the answer I would give is yes. I would just suggest that you share it with the entire task force, what the request is, so that we can add it to our list of things to look at. But that's the purpose of this particular item on the agenda. And we have a lot to do.
Thank you.
Mr. Acevedo?
I was actually on the edge of my seat listening to Ms. Donovan. I hope I'm saying that's your right name. the sixth grader tonight. She spoke a great deal of sense, and I'd love to, and of course, all of the speakers tonight have added to the universe of our thinking, and all of the comments were very important. But I do suggest, it sounds like you've prepared written remarks, Ms. Donovan, and whatever remarks are in writing, we'd love to get them. I would love to, yes, have access to those suggestions tonight, which were, it's a very compelling case. I appreciate it.
Ms. Scarrett?
Just wanted to add on to the appreciation for those who take the time for public comment. I know that we are, as we are tasked, thinking about the city as a whole, thinking about students in totality, thinking about achieving goals for the benefit of all students at exam schools who learn best from diverse communities. But these topics feel so much more personal for families that were personally impacted during this one-year policy. And I just want to acknowledge that and express that we absolutely are listening carefully and appreciate that even as you're navigating and processing, results that you may not have expected, to take the time to come and share your personal histories with us is greatly appreciated. And we do understand that that's not something that we necessarily are experiencing in the same way as a task force that is looking at things more objectively, and that there are a lot of families still processing it in a personal way. So I just wanted to name that happening in our city at this time.
Mr. Acevedo? No? Okay. Obviously, the task force has an awful lot of work ahead of it. It's not easy. It won't be easy. There'll be lots of discussion, and hopefully we will reach consensus at the appropriate moment. I want to begin the closing process, but before I do that, Ms. Sullivan, anything to add?
Thank you. No, I just, other than to first say thank you to our interpreters for being a part of this process. 2 hours is a very long time. So we greatly appreciate your service. And then also to the task force members, again, this is we are turning a corner here. And so I greatly appreciate the thoughtful conversation and the ideating that occurred tonight and that will continue over the next few weeks, and look forward to seeing what comes of all of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sullivan. There's nothing further. I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So
moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion or objection? Hearing none, Ms. Parvic, please call the roll.
Mr. Acevedo?
Aye.
Ms. Aguirre?
Yes.
Ms. Grassa?
Aye.
Ms. Lam?
Aye.
Ms. Nagasawa?
Aye.
Ms. Garrett?
Aye.
Dr. Tang?
Aye.
Ms. Wade?
Aye.
Ms. Sullivan?
Yes.
Mr. Contampasis?
Yes,
Thank you.
the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all, and we'll see you all on Tuesday.